When the idea of writing a book on advertising occurred to me, I asked a publisher friend, "What do you do when you want to write a book? Where do you begin? Where do you end?" "The first thing," he said, "is to have something to say." That stopped me cold. I'm an ad maker, not a book writer. Read on, and you'll agree. But fresh insights are needed into this fascinating business that has been my lifetime love. And a few principles that advertising once knew and has forgotten, in many instances need to be restated. Not long ago, mine was the largest agency in America owned by one man. I'm no longer in the business, so this then is not a pitch for new accounts. I am one of the few admen free to talk. Although I have drawn on experience and memory, this book is not a memoir, not a collection of fond reminiscences. Like most people, there are things I don't want to remember. It is not a magic formula book, not a how to do it for your next campaign, not a book about how professional and how above the crowd we have all become. It is a book about advertising. I'm out of the business, but my heart will always be in it. Advertising, like news, is for the moment. When it ceases to be news, it ceases to be advertising, and it stops selling. This is the Achilles heel of advertising. Look out for it. No program of today will serve you tomorrow. Things change. The unexpected can and will happen, and you must change your ideas to meet the changing times. Chapter 1. Butt in. People ask how to get into the advertising business. I have only one answer. Butt in. There is no better way to do it. I sometimes think of myself and the big agency I eventually ran. What chance would I have had as a young man if I had walked into an agency and asked for a job? Are you a college graduate? No, I never went to college. Did you graduate from high school? I never went there either. What qualifications do you have? I've decided I want to work in advertising. Out the door I would have gone. They wouldn't have had me at any price. So, to any man or woman who wants to get into the advertising business, butt in. Move in with all you've got. Use the talents you'll need as an ad man, all your ingenuity and inventiveness and nerve. If you're convinced that you belong, you'll find a way in. The business needs you. Once in the advertising business, butt in is still a useful philosophy. There is a mistaken notion that gentlemanliness is essential, and many ad men are afraid to butt in. They forget that to be aggressive does not always mean to be impolite. In England, for example, an agency is never allowed to solicit another agency's business, unless they are called in by the advertiser. The procedure is not to disturb another agency's relationship, like lawyers. Yet when an agency has a good idea, and because of ethics it does not butt in, it is not the loss of business to the agency that matters. It is the loss of business to the advertiser, and in the case of England, to the country, that is important. If I am in a position where I cannot ethically or legally offer my services to an advertiser, and can bring him no ideas to increase his profits, then he can make no increased contribution to his company's welfare and to the national economy. To hell with the agency. The country is not going ahead. If that sounds sanctimonious or insincere, the rest of this small volume may change your mind. For surely England, and more our own United States, is going to have to find new markets and continue to supply established ones. My old convictions about growth, searching for ways for a company to grow, now bear on a national and international problem. What happens to a small business when it comes in contact with a big idea? It explodes into a big business. You can see this happening every day. Some advertising man, some merchant, some salesman brings a big idea to a small business and starts it on its way. The power behind the growth of American business, if you look at it squarely, is the power of advertising. Pull out the power, and you pull out the growth. Think what would happen if advertising men in America were told never to solicit new business unless the advertiser himself makes known his wishes. Think what would happen to the soap business, the cereal business, the automobile business, the cigarette business, the appliance business, in fact, indirectly to all business, if advertising men stood by calmly without fighting, and fighting hard, to make business grow bigger. The progress of American business would be slowed up to the danger point. Growth is the big thing advertising is responsible for in America, and it would stop if the advertising agencies stopped thinking that they could present their new ideas to the advertiser. Yet this is exactly what goes on in England. The bylaws of the Institute of Advertising Practitioners, the British counterpart of the American Association of Advertising Agencies, prohibit any member agency from soliciting another member agency's account, or a part of an account, or future advertising by the account, except upon direct invitation from the prospect himself. The newspapers in England support this rule. It's time England, and everyone else for that matter, became aware of the fact that advertising men must not be stopped from calling on new business. They must rather be encouraged to think every day of ideas that will help business. Be encouraged to call on advertisers. Be encouraged to use all the force at their command to get their big ideas used. There is too much talk of the staid quietness of English business, of the gentlemanly attitude. There is not enough talk and encouragement of the aggressiveness that puts labor to work, puts income to work, puts taxes into the treasury, keeps the country alive and busy. I like to think of advertising men pushing business forward to new heights, never attainable without advertising itself. We need more of them trained that way. My editor at Doubleday suggested that unless I established the fact that I had been born, it might not be believed. So, first, I was born. More than merely born, you might say I butted in. When I was in a little crib in the hospital, I am told, I yelled louder than anybody else. They heard me and took care of me first. That first yell was really my first headline, and I've written them ever since. I was already an advertising man when, for me, the world began. Leaving PS 171, I had one distinction. The teacher told me I was the only one in the class graduating without passing arithmetic. It didn't pay the city to carry me any longer, she said. At any rate, I graduated, and I doubt whether I could pass it now. A job. I found one with Samstag and Hilder Brothers, a large notion company of the time. At first, I was the guy who tied the packages. My salary was $4 a week. I got down there at 7:30 in the morning, then I was promoted. There were 8 aisles to be cleaned and 7 boys to clean them. Being a conscientious fellow, I cleaned fast. I wound up with 2 aisles to clean. This was recognition in reverse, but I took it. Then, of all things, they put me in the bookkeeping department. That was enough for me, and for them too. Samstag and Hilder Brothers fired me. Like any young man who'd lost a job and needed another one, I kept on looking. I had several briefly, but it seems that no one paid me more than $15 a week for any of them. I guess I wasn't worth more than $15 a week. After that, I butted into the advertising business, where I'd always wanted to be. I started in a little office at 303 Fifth Avenue. The office was so small, in fact, that if we'd had another man, I'd have had to get out. But there I was, a sign that said advertising on the outside, and a hopeful advertising man on the inside who had had no training in the business. The first thing I did was buy copies of Women's Wear and Vogue to study the advertising in them. I picked out advertisers who looked as if they could use help and called on them. Some came along and helped me get started. I shall always be most grateful to the people who first engaged my services. As a young agency just hatched, we set about to get the Mode account, a hat manufacturer. They spent about $1,000 a year for advertising. $1,000 a year for advertising. That was big to us then. I called on the Mode company and discussed their putting an ad in Vogue magazine. A quarter page. After working on the proposal for several weeks, I found to my chagrin that a man from Vogue, a Mr. Gordon Cole, had been around trying to sell the same idea. I was completely confused and angry. Why was he trying to sell the same thing I was, and yet was reported to have said he was being helpful to me? We couldn't both get the order. Only after I got the account and placed the order with the magazine did I find out that we both could and did get the order. Mr. Cole was working as much for me as he was for Vogue. It made no difference to him whether the order came through an agency or not, as long as his magazine sold the space. We laughed together when I learned, and we became friends. In fact, he later left Vogue and worked with the Biow company for many years. Butting in for business, I went to see a Mr. Haas of Crown Embroidery, wholesale dress importers. I discussed with him putting an advertisement in the New York Times. Advertising in the Times would reach his customers, I said, and put his business on a much higher plane. Mr. Haas was a kindly old gentleman. He listened carefully to what I had to say and told me a story. One day, a man had called to try selling Mr. Haas a trade paper for $20,000. He listened to the fellow and then said, "I don't want to buy your magazine at any price." Taken back a bit, the man said, "Mr. Haas, I turned down $35,000 for this magazine only a week ago." "That's the time two damn fools met," Haas answered. "My story must have been more convincing than the magazine salesman's, because Mr. Haas placed his business with us. His advertisement in the Times cost $20,000. We had to advance the money for payment. This was a great deal of money to me, but I was happy to become kindly old Mr. Haas's agent. I was primarily interested in seeing the ad in print. That was the thrill. Finally, there it was. The first advertisement the Biow company had ever placed in the New York Times. It was a shaft of light. Then came a shaft of information that almost snuffed out my light. Mr. Haas could not pay his bills, and that included the $20,000 he owed us, 85% of which had to be given to the paper. We didn't have that much. After the early stages of shock were over, I undertook the job of going to see our other clients. They were kind enough to lend us enough to pay the Times and to give us time to repay. I learned a great deal from this episode in Buttinskyism. It didn't make me a credit man. I'd never be that. But later I did put a man in charge of such credit and never extended it again unless he approved. Almost never. And I didn't stop looking for ways to butt in. Chapter 2. The Heart of the Matter. I suppose anything written about advertising must have at least one chapter dealing with copy. As a matter of fact, if you are an advertising man, a really good one, you don't need a chapter dealing with copy. On the other hand, if you are not an advertising man, if you don't know good copy when you see it, one chapter isn't worth anything to you anyhow. So with that statement, which makes this completely unnecessary, here goes. I don't believe in rules for copy, except one. Always be sure you have a plus difference when you advertise a product. And be sure that plus difference is something the consumer wants. Not just a difference or an extra, but a pertinent plus difference. For example, you wouldn't sell a maid because you advertised her as having 3 eyes or 3 ears. And yet each is a plus difference. But you might sell a lot of maids if you advertise them with 3 arms. That's a plus difference that counts. Now let me give you my copy method, my absolutely foolproof, surefire, tried and true, tested and approved, perfect, except once in a while, method. That is the one that worked for me. When you have copy to write on a new product or an old one, first find out all there is to know about it and about its competitors. Perhaps your product has a clear-cut plus difference. If so, you're lucky. If not, start digging. Go into the manufacturer. Remember, things the maker takes for granted may prove to be hidden treasure. Next, take a piece of paper and list everything you can think of that distinguishes your product from all others. Everything about it that you think may make the consumer want to buy it above all others. Then put the paper away. Next day, take it out and, by the process of elimination, start to throw out the items of lesser value until you get the one and only one. Some of the others might find their way into subheadings, provided they supplement the main idea. But number 1 is the one that will distinguish the product and, if it is right, sell it. Now don't fool yourself. Simply eliminating all the lesser differences does not mean that the one left over is good. After you have found this one, look at it hard. And if it isn't big enough to do the job, throw it away and begin all over again. You have to keep this up until you know you have the right idea. If you want to check with your research people, give your idea to them. Let them check it against copy now used by your competitors and see if you win. If you want to test 2 or 3 of your ideas, fine. But let each one be a distinctly different idea, not just a variation. When the research is finished, you might face a problem. Your idea might come in second or third, not number 1. Does this mean you are wrong? Does this mean your competitor's copy is better than yours? Not necessarily. In the first place, the other copy has already been used. It is familiar to the consumer. That alone might have brought it in ahead of yours. Now here is where you become an advertising man. If you feel your copy is right, if it stands up from every angle, if you know it will make good, go ahead. After all, you run the advertising, not the research department. Don't let research run you. How do you find the plus difference? By using your research and copy people. Find something in this damn product we can talk about, I would tell them, and they usually did. I don't ever remember asking an advertiser to build a difference into his product. But I do remember telling them that we were not interested in the fact that they had money and a pretty product. They had to have something the customer wanted to buy. If they had that, you could always find something to say that would sell it. A friend of ours once asked us to develop a campaign on nail polish. It so happened we already had one in our files. We had done it just for the fun of it. We had nobody to present it to, but we knew we had a good idea and decided to work it up. Someday, for someone, it was bound to win a place in the market. I'll tell you what we'll do, I told my friend. We'll bring down the campaign we have, and you can take it or leave it. Well, we took it down, 6 layouts in all. The man looked them over and started to smile. Biow, he said, smiling, this is a great campaign, but it's better than our nail polish. I smiled back and told the girl to pack it up. When you get as good a nail polish as this campaign, I said, we'd love to have you come to us again. There is an important point to consider when a product comes your way. Just because a manufacturer has made a product as good as any other on the market and has the money to advertise it, is in itself no reason to think it will be a success. Again, it must have a difference. A plus difference that the consumer wants and wants enthusiastically. A good advertising man can find it. The difference need not necessarily be in the product itself, although, as I've said, things the manufacturer takes for granted may be the key to your success. Often a big idea overlooked by your competitor can make the real difference. Remember, all cigarettes were toasted. But only one said so. Advertising has one function: to sell. To sell goods or to sell an idea. No copy is worth anything unless it does that. When you have your plus difference, play it for all it's worth. Keep it pure. Don't mix it with additional ideas. The more you add, the more you divide. One idea is 100%. 2 ideas are each 50%. As you increase the number, you decrease the impact. So plug your one idea, don't dilute it. You might have a product like Mr. Clean, for example, that cleans everything. Then you must get your headline to encompass everything and put it all across as one idea. Now let me repeat my warning. Make sure the plus difference you're sold on is one the consumer wants, or will want when he learns about it. A man put out a new dog food. As far as he was concerned, it was by far the best on the market. It had all the vitamins, all the minerals. It even had a bone. In fact, it had everything a dog could need. It would make all dogs healthier, livelier. They would even live longer. Think of the copy this produced. Think how it stimulated people to buying the product. But there was one thing wrong. Dogs didn't like it. And that was the end of the dog food in the campaign. After all the difference in the world sells nothing if the consumer doesn't want it. Even if he's a dog. Especially if he's a dog. There have been many admonitions about the use of negative copy. You hear, for example, stay away from negatives. They do not sell your goods. Let's examine that. I've always thought that the halitosis campaign was one of the best jobs done in advertising. Remember now, they didn't say, Listerine makes your breath sweet. They attacked it in reverse. They said that if you have halitosis, even your best friends won't tell you, or your boyfriend won't love you, or your children won't kiss you. So they said, use Listerine. Being self-conscious and not knowing whether you had halitosis or not, there was no one to tell you. You used Listerine. Since you couldn't know in the first place if you had halitosis, you couldn't know if you still had it. You didn't even know if Listerine had cured most of it if you still had it. You were right back where you started, and you kept on using Listerine. That's a negative working in a positive fashion. There is another good word, one that every ad man would like to be able to cry out to every reader or viewer. Stop. A negative if there ever was one. You've seen it in front of a railroad crossing, and boy, you stop. Just try to think of what affirmative word could be used that has the impact of stop. Time and again, we have said the important thing about copy is to sell. Nothing else. Good English or bad English, it doesn't make much difference as long as it sells the merchandise best. Purist subject. Winston tastes good, like a cigarette should, raised a storm. But it certainly sold a storm of cigarettes. How often have you seen the owner of a small grocery store who thinks he can write better copy than a trained advertising man? Better in terms of selling the goods. The fact is, he often can. That's because he knows 2 things. He knows his goods. And he knows what his customers want to know about his goods. He won't sell less because he uses bad English. In advertising Philip Morris, we ended our ads with the line, "No other cigarette can make that statement." We were in trouble with that one. How can a cigarette make a statement? Silly. We got letters complaining about it. Lou Thomas, our vice president and copy chief, wrote an answer to this in which he proved somehow or other that Shakespeare did the same thing. The fact was that we kept on moving Philip Morris because no other cigarette could make that statement. Good English or bad, it got the idea across and did the job. The choosing of words, the writing of copy, is perhaps the most important job in advertising once you have the idea to build around. The best idea in the world can fall short of its objective because you failed to put it across powerfully. Oscar Hammerstein II would have been a sensational copywriter. His copy was the simple but glorious lyric. I wish he had been a copywriter, though I shudder to think of the overhead. He spent weeks looking for just the right word to express an idea perfectly. But when Oscar Hammerstein finished writing something and put his name on that piece of paper, it did just what he wanted it to do. It was a cut and polished gem, exquisite and meaningful. Because he had not compromised, he had struggled with his thoughts as long as he had to, until they really came through. I wonder if you remember one piece of copy he wrote. It is in my office now in his own handwriting. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be carefully taught. Could anything be said more simply or more persuasively? He took a vitally important idea, a literally world-shaking problem, and with hardly a word over 1 or 2 syllables built an unassailable case. Here was a man who gave words wings. I had been watching the copy of a man named Howard Connell for some time, and I was sure he was the man we were looking for. He was with Foote, Cohn, and Belding, where he had, to quote him, "a good job and liked it very much." The more I talked to him, the more I was sure Connell was for us and we were for him. If any man sparkled with ideas, he did. If you shook him, ideas came pouring out. It was only a question of choosing those that belonged and would carry a product further. Howard joined us in 1946. It was to him that we owed the big idea of cigarette hangover, among many others. He turned out to be a tranquil fellow who seems to take things easily, never to get excited, but his copy is certainly exciting. This was in great personal contrast to his boss. I would get excited the minute I saw an idea we could use. Not Howard. He would think it through, work it out, put it on the table, and there it was. He had a keen feeling for merchandising. You could sense it as you read his copy. It would literally step out from the page and sell you whatever he determined to sell. Don't tell people how good you make your goods. Tell them how good your goods make them. You must have heard that one at your mother's knee. Well, across the street from where I sit is a great big beautiful building owned by a great big beautiful bank. In the building is an exhibition room run by the bank. A large sign outside the door says, "The Story of Banking." Few people went in to see the exhibit. Later, someone got the bright idea of putting the word "open" on the outside. They couldn't imagine people staying away after that, but people did. How much better it would be, how many more people would go in, if instead of saying "The Story of Banking," which is the bank's point of view, they put up a sign that said "How Banking Helps You," which is your point of view. That would change the entire concept, inside and out. Of course, people are interested in how banking helps them. Most of them need it. There are so many services promised under such a heading, and I'm sure the bank renders those services with the highest efficiency. But the story of banking doesn't say so. Over and over again, we see the same thing. Businesses getting so fond of themselves they cannot help telling you how good they are, how big they have grown. Really, who cares except they themselves? What really interests you is how big you are, how fast you can grow, and how the bank or manufacturer can help you. For years, Pepsi-Cola had been saying, "Drink Pepsi-Cola." Elizabeth Lehman of our company, a top-flight advertising woman, came along with an idea. She suggested, Enjoy Pepsi Cola. Look at the difference between these two. One word, but the first tells you to drink Pepsi Cola, in effect because I, the manufacturer, will profit from it. The other tells you to enjoy Pepsi Cola, because you, the consumer, will profit from it. Just one word moves the whole idea from me, the manufacturer, to you, the consumer. That's the way the goods should move too. Don't tell people how good you make your goods. Tell them how good your goods make them. There is an old axiom. The higher the price, the fewer the sales. The lower the price, the greater the sales. Allowing for variables, it is safe to say that this principle is sound. Therefore, I firmly believe it is wrong to advertise a price unless that price is a stimulus to the sale. You wouldn't, for example, feature the price of a Rolls-Royce in an advertisement. That wouldn't help the sale. But you might put the price of a compact Chevrolet in because it would help the sale. Wherever you do feature the price in your advertising, feature it big, not small, so that it looks like an asset, not just an item in a catalog. But above all, be sure that you have a sound reason for using it. Only the other day I heard a brand of coffee advertised on television. The coffee was sold for more money, and that fact was emphasized and repeated as though it alone were sufficient reason to buy. That is wrong. I understand all that is meant by featuring the higher price in this way. The implication of a better product, even snob appeal. But it seems to me that an advertising man worth his salt should be able to find something more effective. One thing is sure. When you mention higher price, you certainly are not encouraging people to go out and buy your product. On the contrary, they are more likely to buy when your copy tells them what's above average inside the package, not outside on the price tag. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check our link in the description, where you'll find many other fundamental marketing books in different languages. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more persuasion and direct response content. See you in the next one.